These are the 20 strongest characters in Invincible, and today I'll be ranking and explaining each one. These include Earth's superheroes, 𝗕𝗲𝗏𝗏mites, some weird aliens, and even some mysterious characters we know very little about. So let's start with Red Rush. Red Rush is one of the few guardians of the globe who deserves some respect when it comes to power. He's pretty much like the Flash of the Invincible universe, being one of the fastest beings alive. He wears a fully red costume and doesn't use any weapons. Despite speed, he also has superhuman perception, which allows him to perceive things much faster than regular humans and react in time. We saw this when he managed to stop Nolan's attack on Immortal before any other Guardians even realized it. Red Rush never got a lot of screen time in the comics and barely got the spotlight during his big confrontation with Omni-Man in the TV show. However, judging from what he was able to achieve during his fight with Nolan, in my opinion, he seems to be among the strongest Guardians. Unfortunately, since we never saw him do much, I'll have to put him at the bottom of our list. One done, 19 more to go, and let's continue with Universa. Universa was a staff-wielding alien and a minor antagonist to Invincible. Her power mostly came from her weapon, which allowed her to suck up and channel power. Universa basically came out of nowhere and gave Mark and Eve a really tough time. They were only able to defeat her once her staff was taken away from her. After losing to Mark, she was imprisoned for a while before a wiser Invincible decided to give her a chance to speak and eventually let her go. Not many people can stand their ground against a 𝗕𝗏𝗏mite, and Universa made it seem easy with her staff, which makes her a great candidate for the 19th spot. 18, 𝗲𝗏𝗏s. 𝗲𝗏s was the founder of the Coalition of Planets, the organization dedicated to stopping the 𝗕𝗏𝗏mite Empire. However, unbeknownst to everyone around him, 𝗲𝗏𝗏s was actually the 𝗕𝗏𝗏mite himself. You see, thousands of years ago, 𝗲𝗏𝗏s created a virus that basically killed off most of the population of Viltrum, including the Emperor at the time, 𝗷𝗏. For his betrayal, 𝗲𝗏𝗏s was hunted down throughout the cosmos. As a 𝗕𝗏𝗏mite, 𝗲𝗏𝗏s was an extremely strong fighter, but besides that, he was also an excellent leader and strategist, being able to guide the coalition in many battles against 𝗕𝗏𝗏mites and their allies. During the later part of the comic, 𝗲𝗏𝗏s was among the people who helped Mark and Nolan launch a full-on assault against Viltrum. However, after helping them destroy the planet, 𝗲𝗏𝗏s met a swift end when Thrag appeared and brutally killed him. Considering he died pretty quickly, we didn't get to see much of 𝗲𝗏𝗏s in terms of strength, but the fact that he was durable enough to help destroy Viltrum speaks for itself. 17, Immortal. Immortal was one of the original members of the Guardians of the Globe. He is a being from medieval times who gained immortality for some unknown reason and became a superhero in the 90s. He wears a blue and white costume and doesn't usually use any weapons. Immortal possesses all usual superhero abilities like flight and superhuman strength, with some evidence suggesting that his raw power rivals that of some 𝗕𝗏𝗏mites. Also, despite being immortal when it comes to aging, he is also immortal in a sense that he can't really die from any injuries. His body will just keep regenerating, and if enough of his anatomy is reconnected, he will come back to life. His most impressive feat in the story is standing up to Omni-Man and putting up a great fight against him. He was able to hold his own for the majority of this fight and even injured Nolan's eyes with his thumbs before finally being defeated. He later tried to stand up against Robot's takeover of Earth and even participated in saving the planet from the 𝗲𝗏𝗏s a couple of times. However, ultimately, he never made quite the splash most of the other characters above him made over the course of the story. He eventually settled down, married 𝗕𝗏𝗏kate, and had children with her. By the end of the story, he became the ruler of Earth too. There are still 16 incredibly strong characters left to cover, and I can't wait to show you guys some of the strongest ones. But before that, let's continue with Oliver. Oliver was Nolan's half Traxxon, half human son. He was a pretty strong and smart character, but suffered a lot due to his lack of experience. Oliver was first introduced to us as a baby on Thraxa. After being transported to Earth with Mark, however, due to him being half Traxxon, he aged in a matter of weeks. Although Traxxons have an incredibly short lifespan due to Oliver's 𝗕𝗏𝗏mite genes, he managed to slow that process down quite a bit. When he grew up, Oliver developed into a ruthless guy who was ready to kill villains, unlike Mark. He even agreed to help Alan with his plan to spread the Scourge virus at the expense of the people on Earth. After that, he moved to 𝗕𝗏𝗏scria and spent time there there working for the Coalition. While there, he eventually defected to 𝗏𝗏's side to support his fellow 𝗕𝗲𝗏mites and half-Thraxan people. He then acted as a spy for the Coalition for a couple of years until he learned that 𝗏𝗏 plans to send assassins to kill Mark's family. In order to prevent that, Oliver sacrificed his life to save his niece and died after getting brutally killed by 𝗏𝗏. Like his other half-Thraxan siblings, Oliver may be strong, but he's just not as capable or powerful enough compared to any pure-blood 𝗕𝗲𝗏mite. A lot of half-Thraxan 𝗕𝗲𝗏mites were easily defeated by Mark, Nolan, and Alan during the war, so it's safe to say that Oliver's strength is around that level as well. 15. Space Racer. Space Racer is pretty much a speeding, bike-driving alien that roams the cosmos. He wears a uniform that matches his hover bike and carries a gun that can only be fired by him. The gun also gets immediately back to him whenever someone touches it, and is one of the few weapons in the world capable of hurting 𝗕𝗲𝗏mites. Over 100 years ago, before Nolan ever stepped foot onto the Earth, he and Space Racer were locked in an epic battle. Although standing your ground against Nolan is pretty impressive, this encounter didn't go so well for Space Racer though, since he was basically buried inside asteroid rubble for a century. When Nolan defected to the Coalition of Planets side, he was tasked with searching for powerful allies to combat the 𝗕𝗲𝗏mites. That's when Nolan and Alan found Space Racer and rescued him from his grim imprisonment. Upon freeing himself, Space Racer was surprisingly nimble and agile. He was capable enough to push Nolan around and almost kill the 𝗕𝗲𝗏mite, although Nolan wasn't really seriously fighting him at the time. Once Alan convinced Space Racer to join the Coalition's side, Space Racer took part in the invasion of 𝗕𝗏. He proved to be rather fast and was even able to avoid a few notable 𝗕𝗲𝗏mites while trying to aim his shots at them. He even managed to injure a few. Due to his ridiculous speed and overpowered gun, Space Racer definitely deserves a higher spot on the list than all other characters we've covered so far. 14. Zach Thompson Tech Jacket. Similarly to Space Racer, Tech Jacket also has one of the best weapons in the universe. You see, after saving an alien's life, the alien suit binded itself to Zach's body, and he was never able to take it off after that. The suit granted Zach some incredible powers like superhuman speed and strength, invulnerability, and even shooting energy beams. This started Zach's journey in space as he fought for the weak and innocent across the cosmos, along with several bounty hunters and alien colonizers. We were first introduced to him when he was recruited by the Coalition to help invade 𝗕𝗲. Though Tech Jacket barely does anything when confronted by the likes of Anissa, at least he survived the fray and managed to shoot a beam or two that somewhat damaged his foes. Other than that, he's only made a few brief cameos here and there since he's friends with Alan. In my opinion, he and Space Racer are pretty close in terms of strength, but I gave Tech Jacket the higher place simply because of his suit's potential. 13. Robot. Rudolph Connors, aka Robot, is something like this series' version of Iron Man. He's a genius who managed to build a remote-controlled drone that he uses to experience the world. Before getting his new body, Rudolph was basically a deformed human being who, with the help of the Mahler twins, was able to clone himself into a new body. Robot always believed in the greater good and that the end justified the means, which led to him making some questionable decisions later on in the story. Anyways, the machines Rudolph builds can go against pretty much anyone. He has a wide assortment of weapons and droids that he uses for a number of different scenarios. At first, Robot was pretty secretive about his identity and rather weak compared to the other heavy hitters on the teen team. However, slowly but surely, Robot began to take control of the team, mainly due to his superior intellect and leadership skills. During that time, he helped Invincible face off against several powerful enemies like the Mahler twins and Machine Head. When Mark was threatened by the government, Robot saved Mark's life and even helped him deal with 𝗕𝗲𝗏mite's greatest weakness, their sense of equilibrium. However, later on, when Robot sensed that the 𝗕𝗲𝗏mites were beginning to become a threat to the planet, he quickly started upgrading his suits to prepare for potential battles against Mark or Omni-Man. Eventually, after Mark's partnership with Dinosaurus and the massive extinction event caused by the accelerated global warming, Robot became distrustful of Mark's ability to keep the planet safe. Mark was hence exiled to another dimension so he can't attract trouble to the Earth, and Robot quietly took over the entire planet. After taking control, he ruled the planet peacefully for a while and started creating a utopia of sorts. In the end, he played a huge role in helping Mark defeat 𝗏𝗏 by pinning the latter down on the sun's surface. However, in the end, Mark and the rest of the heroes took back control of Earth and imprisoned Robot inside a glass jar. In the future, we see Robot is still stuck inside the tube, and it looks like he became an advisor to the Immortal who's assumed control of the planet. The fact that Robot has the smarts to build machines that can fight on par with some of the strongest characters in the series is evidence enough that he deserves the 13th spot. It's hard to believe that there are still 12 characters stronger than Robot on this list, but there actually are. And one of them is Ragnars. Ragnars are a race of savage alien beasts and are considered one of the physically strongest races in the universe. They are reddish in color and aren't intelligent enough to use any sort of weaponry. Instead, they're equipped with claws and teeth sharp enough to cut through 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝐺 skin. Yeah, you heard that right. Ragnars are actually preying on 𝗕𝗲𝗰ites and are one of their only weaknesses. They were first introduced getting captured by the Coalition's forces in order to be used as a trap for 𝗕𝗲𝗰ites. They were fairly successful with their attacks and killed off a good number of 𝗕𝗲𝗻's forces. Later, the Ragnars were used again in order to kill Thrag on Thraxa, but they were easily disposed of by the combined efforts of Thrag and Battle Beast. Despite that, one of them was still able to cut open Thrag's stomach with a single strike, which is beyond impressive. The reason they are so low on the list is simply because of their lack of intelligence, which leaves them open to many attacks and tricks that wouldn't normally work on other characters. 11. 𝗲𝗏𝗄𝐲. 𝗲𝗏𝗄𝐲 never had the raw strength needed to be considered a formidable foe. Instead, his greatest asset was his ability to outthink and outmaneuver opponents far stronger than himself. That's why he's always been one of Mark's greatest villains. When we first saw 𝗲𝗏, he was just an average Joe who loved science. However, we quickly learned that he was constructing an interdimensional hub with the help of the Mauler twins. Things went sideways as soon as Mark appeared on the scene, which led to an accident that left 𝗲𝗏 permanently disfigured. Narrowly escaping the encounter with his life, 𝗲𝗏 hired the best doctors from various dimensions to rebuild his body, enhancing his strength and durability to superhuman levels. After that was done, he had only one goal: to exact revenge on Mark, blaming him for everything that happened. Once he engaged Invincible in a battle, he finally showed how efficient in a fight he was by opening many different portals in order to disorient and trap Mark. However, he ultimately lost that battle and was presumed dead. Later on, he was somehow resurrected and then came back to attack Mark again with an army of Marks from different dimensions. After decimating Mark's reputation, 𝗲𝗏 was once again defeated with his limb being ripped off. Not learning from his previous mistakes, 𝗲𝗏 attempts to mess with Mark again by severing Eve's leg and trapping Mark in the same wasteland he trapped all of his clones in. After a long discussion with Eve, 𝗲𝗏 finally realizes that he was wrong and seeks to make amends. He opens the portal to bring Mark back to his own dimension, but gets suddenly attacked by his evil counterpart. Mark tries to save 𝗲𝗏 with Robot's help, but watches helplessly as Robot betrays him and kills 𝗲𝗏. In the end, 𝗲𝗏 wasn't that powerful, but his incredible intelligence and the ability to open portals made him a great risk to any character in the show, as he could defeat foes way stronger than himself. With this, we are exactly halfway through the video, and from here on, the characters are going to get exponentially stronger than before. 10. @Eve. Eve is Mark's wife, and her powers allow her to alter and manipulate the atoms around her. This allows her to use telekinesis, fly, regenerate, alter people's memories, and even construct anything she wants in seconds. She initially made her debut by assisting Mark on a number of missions as a member of the Team. She then briefly became a guardian of the globe before she retired and decided to use her powers to help impoverished people around the world. She faced her first real challenge later on in the show, when she battled Conquest. Though she put up an admirable fight, which is a big achievement considering how strong Conquest is, she ultimately lost the battle and almost died. Out of sheer luck, or possibly some kind of hidden ability, Eve was able to reconstruct her body along with Mark's after the conclusion of their brutal battle. It's also important to mention that reconstructing her and Mark's bodies also made them stronger than they were before, which seems to be another effect of her abilities. Later on, she decided to keep Mark's baby and finally retired from being a hero. She even convinced Mark to do the same thing, and they moved to 𝐂𝐭⁴ to raise their daughter together. Unfortunately, Mark wound up going inside a mysterious cave and slipped into a 5-year coma while Eve was left behind to raise their daughter alone. After Mark returned, Eve fought tooth and nail to keep her child safe against Thrag's offspring. Eve was also present during the final confrontation against Thrag. She played a minor role, but held up against the hybrid 𝗕𝗲𝗰ites surprisingly well. Eve may not be as conventionally strong as the rest of the people on this list, but the potential her powers hold can allow her to achieve feats that supersede strength. She can literally make herself younger by the end of the series by rearranging her body's own molecular composition. If she can do something like that, I can only imagine what she can do to her enemies. 9. Anissa. There aren't many female Viltrumites in the Invincible universe, but this one certainly made her presence known. She is one of the strongest Viltrumites in the universe and is over 1,000 years old. During her first introduction, Anissa came to Earth to convey the Viltrumites' demands to Mark after his father abdicated his post. After giving Mark an ultimatum to finish colonizing the planet, Anissa beat him up and barely took any damage from him. This single feat cemented her position as a powerhouse who's capable of handling threats like Mark, while pretty much nothing back on Earth could hurt him. The next time we saw her was when she invaded 𝗕𝗲 with 𝗲𝗏 and defended herself during the Coalition's invasion of Viltrum. She stood her ground and managed to survive each encounter, eventually becoming a citizen of Earth. Later on, after failing to find anyone she was attracted to enough to bear any offspring, she chose to kiss Mark without his consent and do some non-family friendly things to him. This resulted in her having a child with him called Marcus. Anyway, after Mark came out of his 5-year coma, she tried to make amends and apologize since she sincerely changed as a person, but was rejected immediately. Finally, Anissa participated in the final confrontation against 𝗲𝗏 and even saved Eve's life during the battle. Unfortunately, she suffered a severe wound and ended up dying because of it. As one of the strongest Viltrumites, Anissa could tank punches that would undoubtedly kill many characters below her on the list, which is why she deserves the 9th spot. 8. 𝗏𝗏. 𝗏𝗏 was one of 𝗲𝗏's underlings. He was a ruthless Viltrumite general who survived the Viltrumite Civil War and earned his prestige within the ranks. Like all of the other Viltrumites, his only weapons were his fists and combat prowess. He also wore the typical clothes any Viltrumite usually wears. We were first introduced to the character when he personally tried to arrest Nolan along with 2 other associates. After surviving Nolan's merciless beatdown, 𝗏𝗏 was strong enough to pummel Nolan during his supposed execution. He even survived the onslaught when Alan and Nolan escaped from captivity. 𝗏𝗏 then went on to serve under 𝗲𝗏 during the Coalition's invasion and fought against Mark and the rest of his allies. He then spent some time on Earth. Later on, 𝗏𝗏 also arrested 𝗲𝗏 with 3 other associates as soon as he realized Nolan's connection to the late King Argal. 𝗏𝗏 even participated in the final confrontation with 𝗲𝗏 and took out several of his half-Braxton, half-Viltrumite offspring. Although we can't accurately judge 𝗏𝗏's strength compared to other Viltrumites due to his rank, he should be one of the strongest. 7. Dinosaurus. Although Dinosaurus' strength mostly comes from his brains, he is a rare example of an intelligent character being strong as well, as he was on par with almost any Viltrumite in the series. Dinosaurus is actually a split personality from his human counterpart David Anders. He usually wears a lab coat and has sharp claws along with sharp teeth that he can use to severely injure any enemy. During his initial introduction to the series, Dinosaurus came off as a bad guy to Mark, who was willing to sacrifice human lives for the sake of the greater good. He planted all sorts of bombs in strategic locations around cities to make sure his plans came to fruition. Since one of Dinosaurus' greatest aspects is his intuition and superior intelligence, he even managed to convince Mark to sympathize with him. He successfully blew up Los Angeles since he had the foresight to predict it had become the largest solar panel on Earth in the future. When Mark was infected with the Scourge virus, it was Dinosaurus who synthesized a cure for him and risked his life to save him. Despite being able to hold his own against someone like Mark, Dinosaurus was still nowhere close to handling the mighty 𝗲𝗏. However, Dinosaurus somehow recovered and managed to flood the entire planet to achieve his goals. He then claimed that he killed Mark, while in reality, he only did this in order to make Mark seem like a good guy to the rest of the world. Later, in order to atone for his actions, he requested Mark to kill him. Despite not showing off his strength much, Dinosaurus had the brains and raw power to battle almost any enemy in the universe and come out on top. 6. Conquest. We've covered some strong Viltrumites in this video, but Conquest is by far the strongest one so far. He is a legendary Viltrumite veteran who was widely considered to be the 2nd strongest in the entire Empire. Conquest is pretty much a killing machine with hands that can pummel mountains into dust. Conquest's first appearance was a fairly brutal one when he took on Mark one-on-one and absolutely knocked the living daylights out of him. Not only that, Conquest took no damage from Adam Eve while he was beating Mark down. At this time, everyone seemed like flies compared to this guy. He laughed and enjoyed himself the entire time he was beating Mark and Oliver ever, but surprisingly, he somehow got defeated when Eve awakened her powers, with Mark completely pummeling his face. Even after that, Conquest still managed to regenerate and even escape from the Pentagon without much effort. The only thing that Conquest is afraid of in the entire world is 𝗲𝗏 himself. Perhaps the only time we ever see any display of vulnerability from him is when Conquest begs 𝗲𝗏 for mercy and another chance. After that, Conquest took a shot at Nolan after ambushing his ship, but chose to chase after Mark instead for a rematch. As intimidating as he was both times during his battles with Mark, Conquest wound up losing again, but not without leaving Mark badly injured. Despite hating his guts, Nolan gave Conquest a proper burial to signify that the warrior deserved all the respect given to him. And let's be fair, if your only loss in the entire series is against Mark, who is literally a protagonist, you definitely deserve a high spot on the list. Only 5 more characters are left, and the power all of these have is absolutely insane. 5. Omni-Man. Nolan, aka Omni-Man, was the son of Argal, the first emperor of the Viltrumite Empire. He was considered powerful enough to control an entire unit of Viltrumites on his own. He wears a costume that's reminiscent of what 𝗲𝗏 wears, perhaps in symbolic acknowledgement of the latter's overwhelming strength. After volunteering to colonize planets for the Empire, Nolan moved to Earth and became the superhero Omni-Man. There, he got romantically involved with a human female and joined the Guardians of the Globe. By the time he had his son, Mark, Nolan was considered the strongest being on the planet. Once Mark was 17, Nolan finally put his decades-old plan into action by secretly murdering the Guardians of the Globe in order to weaken the Earth. Despite how hard it seemed, Nolan soloed the entire team, even though he had to face all kinds of unique superpowers. Once Mark learned the truth about his father, Nolan was forced to have his son confront reality by repeatedly punching him in the face. Surprisingly, Mark somehow got through to his father and convinced him that what he and his empire were doing wasn't right. This led to Nolan leaving Mark alive and escaping to Thraxa. Since he abandoned his post on Earth, other Viltrumites soon came looking for him. This is the first time we saw Nolan fight against other Viltrumites, and his strength was impressive to say the least. In fact, he was almost able to kill 3 Viltrumites on his own. He later joined the Coalition of Planets and helped them gather many strong warriors across the cosmos. During his fights with Viltrumites, we saw him choking Lucan with his bare hands, standing his ground against Conquest, and even knocking Anissa back with a powerful punch. Up until the final phases of the invasion, nothing really gave Nolan a challenge besides �𝗏 himself, who managed to brutally defeat him. He later also fought Alan when they disagreed on using the Scourge virus on Earth. This is also one of the rare fights Nolan lost. However, bear in mind that Alan is incredibly powerful, and you'll be hearing more about him pretty soon. Eventually, it was revealed to other Viltrumites that Nolan was the rightful heir to the Empire, and he assumed his place on the throne. He also ordered the capture of 𝗲𝗏, but later sentenced him to exile instead of killing him. Later, during the final confrontation against 𝗲𝗏 and his forces, Nolan put up a great fight, but was eventually killed by 𝗲𝗏, who stabbed him directly through the heart, leaving him no chance to regenerate. Considering how many times he was ready to fight foes stronger than himself, how honored he was by his underlings, and how capable he was as a combatant, Omni-Man more than deserved to be called one of the strongest Viltrumites to ever exist. 4. Alan the Alien. Alan is a Unipan who at first wasn't very special in terms of strength, but by the end of the series earned his spot as one of the strongest beings in the universe. A big reason why he's so strong is because he gets a huge boost whenever he's almost about to die. His body also has an innate ability to constantly adapt. Alan was one of the very few Unipans who had survived a genocide at the hands of the Viltrumites. Like others from his race, he was heavily experimented on since birth and was made to endure tough trials that led to the death of every other member of his species. Even though Alan survived all of the experimentation, he was still not strong enough to defeat 𝗲𝗏. That's partly why Thetis decided to end the project. During his first introduction, Alan was easily able to tank any of Mark's punches and has even survived an encounter with Omni-Man in the past. Later, when he was having dinner with his girlfriend, Alan got ambushed and absolutely destroyed by a scouting team of Viltrumites. Luckily, he was saved and revived by the Coalition. But after he regained consciousness, Alan realized he was much stronger than before. He then intercepted a Viltrumite ship that had Nolan captive on board and managed to successfully fend off Viltrumite commanders. During the invasion of Viltrum, Alan easily impaled a Viltrumite officer with his arm in order to save Tech Jacket, and it took 3 top-level Viltrumite officers to hold him down. All of this strength simply came from him regenerating over and over again. After this battle, Alan became the new leader of the Coalition of Planets. However, he soon became even more powerful because, as we can see during his confrontation with Nolan over the 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗲 he literally took no damage from Nolan's punches and easily injured him. 5 years later, 𝐿𝐸, one of the coalition members, staged a coup in order to kill Alan due to him never listening to her orders. 𝐿𝐸 eventually blew up herself, leaving Alan in a bad state. This near-death encounter accelerated his innate healing factor even more and made him stronger than he ever was. Once 𝗕𝗲 invaded 𝗕𝗲𝗃 with his offspring, Alan was able to tank a couple of punches from him without being killed, and even saved Mark's life by lifting him off the sun's surface. What makes Alan so strong and worthy of a top spot is his sheer will to survive, his ability to adapt, and the limitless potential he has. 3. Mark. Mark is the son of Nolan and Debbie, which makes him a half-Viltrumite, half-human hybrid. Although at the start of the series he is relatively weak, by the end of it, Mark becomes one of the strongest beings in the universe. But let's start from the beginning. Mark found out he was half-Viltrumite by the time he was 7 and waited for his powers to kick in ever since. Eventually his wish came true and he was eager to make a name for himself as a hero. During his early heroing days, Mark was rather weak compared to other heroes like War Woman or Immortal, and hence he aligned himself with the Teen Team. However, in the following time, Mark quickly developed his abilities and became a real threat to any villain on Earth. His final test in season 1 was against his father, and despite all of his improvements, he still proved to be no match for an experienced Viltrumite. After his father left the planet, Mark continued training in order to get stronger and officially became Earth's mightiest hero. Once Mark arrived on Thraxa and met his father again, we could see that his strength had developed even further as he was able to hold his ground against Viltrumite soldiers and survive, despite the odds being stacked heavily against him. Ultimately, he and his father lost this battle, and Mark was tasked with conquering the Earth. Soon, in order to check on Mark's progress, Viltrumites sent Anissa to visit the planet. Although at this point, we were all hoping that Mark would finally defeat a strong Viltrumite on his own, that didn't happen. Anissa beat him up relatively easily and threatened him to comply with Viltrumite's demands. Frustrated by his weaknesses, Mark would then go on to lift a 400-ton weight in order to train. During this time, Mark was also betrayed by Cecil, which motivated him to create his own hero organization with Eve and Oliver. Soon after that, however, he had to face the biggest threat so far, the unstoppable Viltrumite Conquest. Although Conquest was beating up Mark, Oliver, and Eve for the majority of the fight through determination and a bit of luck, Mark actually managed to defeat him by headbutting him until his face completely disappeared. Overcoming a powerful foe like Conquest at his age showed just how much potential Mark had as a character. Later on, in his second battle against Conquest, Mark actually managed to kill him once and for all in one of the most brutal battles in the entire comic. At this point in the story, it was evident that Mark became one of the strongest Viltrumites in the world, but this isn't where his growth stopped. During the war against Viltrumites, Mark, along with Nolan and Thetis, managed to destroy Viltrum by flying right through it. Mark then went on to receive the beating of a lifetime by an enraged 𝗕𝗲 and narrowly made it out alive because his foe granted him mercy. However, in their final battle, after witnessing 𝗕𝗲 killing Oliver, Mark shows just how far he came in terms of strength by attacking 𝗕𝗲 and holding his ground. In the final moments of the battle, Mark threw 𝗕𝗲 right into the sun and managed to kill him by ripping his throat out with his teeth. After the time skip, during the final chapter of the series, we can see Mark beating Alan in their friendly match, proving undoubtedly that he is stronger than him and deserving of the 3rd spot. Before we cover the strongest character in the entire show, let's first quickly cover the second strongest, Battle Beast. Battle Beast, as his name suggests, is an animal bred for war, who can easily stand toe-to-toe against any known character in the Invincible universe. His real name's actually 𝗕𝗏, and he's considered the guardian spirit of his home planet, who is known for excessive violence and his love for combat. Contrary to many other characters on this list, Battle Beast actually uses weapons in his fights, mainly a hammer and a broadsword. After getting exiled from his home planet for his thirst for battle, Battle Beast roamed the cosmos looking for worthy opponents. That's how he found himself working for Machine Head on Earth. We were first introduced to Battle Beast in episode 5, when he pummeled the life out of Mark and the rest of the new Guardians of the Globe. He then left the planet sorely disappointed that he couldn't find anyone stronger to fight. He'd then go on to make a brief appearance during the Viltrumite War when the coalition of planets invaded Viltrum. After getting flung away by 𝗕𝗲 during the scuffle, Battle Beast spent the next few years looking for 𝗕𝗲 with the coalition. After finally locating 𝗕𝗲 on Thraxa, Battle Beast personally went there to kill kill him. Before their epic duel started, however, the coalition dropped down some Ragnars that slashed open Thrag's abdomen. Since 𝐵ATTLEBEAST wanted to have a fair fight against Thrag, he actually helped him defeat Ragnar's, and even cut open his own stomach to even the odds. Their epic duel lasted for multiple days, but in the end, Thrag managed to win by crushing 𝗏's heart. With his dying breath, 𝗵𝐵ATTLEBEAST thanked Thrag for the glorious fight. Despite getting skinned and worn as a fancy coat by his opponent, the fact is, if it wasn't for his battle ethics, 𝗵𝐵ATTLEBEAST could have easily killed Thrag and ended the series right then and there. And if that's not enough to grant him the second spot, I don't know what is. 1. Thrag. Thrag, also known as the Great Regent, is the leader of the Viltrumites and the strongest one to ever exist. He wears a typical Viltrumite outfit, but with bright red symbols, something Omni-Man tries to mimic with his own hero costume. Born as the son of a nobleman, Thrag's life was full of hardships from the get-go, despite his powerful father's position as one of the previous emperor's advisors. Thrag received all sorts of top-tier military training that transformed him into an unstoppable killing machine. After the previous emperor died, Thrag took part in the Viltrumite Civil War and proved himself by beating every other Viltrumite that stood in his way. After the war, Thrag was tasked with finding the heir to the Viltrumite Empire. But after some time, he completely stopped looking, as he believed he was the one who should lead the Viltrumites. The first time we see Thrag in the comics is when the mighty Conquest is groveling on his knees in front of him. With an introduction so powerful, the character then goes on to show off his capabilities immediately after by taking down Speed Racer during the Coalition of Planets invasion on Viltrum. Thrag then proceeds to tank a punch from Mark before swatting him away like a fly. He even breaks off Oliver's arm and jaw. By the end of the invasion, 𝐵ATTLEBEAST gets his head decapitated by Thrag's bare hands, which goes to show just how much stronger this guy is than everyone else. If it wasn't for his duty to his people, Thrag could have easily killed both Mark and Nolan, but in the end, he decided to spare them. However, besides being an unstoppable fighter, Thrag is also a quick thinker. We see this when he makes a deal with Mark to let Viltrumites take over Earth in order to ensure the survival of his race. Later, when Alan decides to infect the remaining Viltrumites with the Scourge virus, Thrag offers Mark his aid. And with Dinosaurus' help, his scientists successfully find a way to cure Mark. With Viltrumites slowly changing after growing accustomed to their lives on Earth, a frustrated Thrag decides to kill Nolan on the moon, but gets ambushed by his people before he can do so. After Nolan assumes his position as Grand Regent of the Viltrum Empire, Thrag is then imprisoned and exiled. While in exile, Thrag goes on to build an army of his own offspring on the planet Thraxa before 𝗵𝐵ATTLEBEAST arrives to fight him. After several days of non-stop fighting, the brutal battle comes to an end with 𝗵𝐵ATTLEBEAST having his heart ripped out and crushed. With this, Thrag proved once again that he was undoubtedly the strongest character in the entire comic, as no one else could even dream of defeating the 𝗵𝐵ATTLEBEAST. Thrag then goes on to conquer many other planets with his half Viltrum, half Thraxan army until he gets confronted by the resistance forces led by Mark and Nolan. After sacrificing dozens of his children, Thrag proceeds to brutally murder Nolan before getting flung into the sun by Mark, where their final battle starts. Mere inches away from death, Thrag broke off both of Mark's arms before succumbing to his injuries and being consumed by the sun. With such impressive feats under his belt and the tactical thinking that's required to fend off the forces of practically the entire universe, Thrag easily deserves the top spot on this list. And if you liked this video, you'll definitely like this one as well, where I explain all of Mark's forms in Invincible. Go on, click it.